How we doing, everyone? Welcome back. It's the Richie Hicks Show, sports podcast. And I am wrapping up my top 75 of all-time NBA players. For segment 3, it's going to be numbers 23 through 1. I think I purposely made it a 23 because I'm willing to bet most of you can figure out who my number 1 is. Before I get started on my list, though, I want to talk about some of my reaches. A couple of friends have spoken to me about some picks that I made that maybe they wouldn't have put on this list. But these are some of my reaches. Tim Hardaway, Artis Gilmore, Tracy, McGrady, Chris Mullin, Reggie Lewis, Drazen, Petrovic, Anthony Davis, and Alonzo Mourning. This is what I'm going to say about some of these players. In the cases of Reggie Lewis and Drazen Petrovic, I believe that they left before their time, both dying tragically. And I tried to gauge it on where I felt that their careers were headed prior to their tragic deaths. Chris Mullin, Dream Teamer is why I mainly put him up. Tremendous scorer. He did have some holes in his game. I guess you could say defensively would be a hole. Same would go for Tracy McGrady. I know that there was an outcry from a lot of NBA players that Tracy McGrady should have been on the top 75 list. Similar to Carmelo Anthony, who did make the top 75, a hole in McGrady's game, in addition to being injured, would probably be not being able to win a playoff series when he was in his prime as a star. Other than that, defensive prowess to a level, I do believe that. Wouldn't necessarily consider Zoe, Hardaway, or Gilmore a reach, but they didn't make the top 75 list. So I kind of went about it my own way to make sure that I got these guys on there. I tried very hard to make sure that I had almost an even amount of every position. That's not always easy to do when you're making one of these lists. My good friend Idris Salam, good friend of the show, kind of called me out on the Anthony Davis pick, saying that he didn't feel that he belonged there. Idris may very well be right about that, but the reason why I did put Anthony Davis on my list was because center is a dying position in today's NBA compared to what the league was, say, in the 80s and 90s. I do believe that in Anthony Davis's case, he is a throwback in certain regards to being a traditional center and a successful one at that, and that's part of the reason why maybe I might have ranked him a little higher. But the crazy thing about all these lists is that they're very subjective. Now, my honorable mentions. Once again, some of these players were on the all-time 75 that didn't make my list. Some of these players were not. But these are guys that I want to acknowledge and say that, quite frankly, they're good enough to be on my list. And they are on, some of them are on the official list. I'll explain why Grant Hill and Penny Hardaway did not make my list. Health, basically health, the main reason why those two did not get on my list. I do believe that Penny Hardaway could have been one of the true great point guards in the 90s, coming in as a tandem with Shaquille O'Neal. He had the size of a Magic Johnson with more athleticism, and he just did everything well. But unfortunately for Penny, injuries literally derailed his career. Grant Hill was on the same path in terms of being just a bona fide superstar when he was with the Detroit Pistons. When he got to Orlando, injuries caught up with him and he missed basically half of his Orlando time. Dave DeBusschere, this might be a little controversial, especially since I'm a Knicks fan. I tried to base it on the thing with the old guys that, are on the list previously, is that they kind of hold back some of the newer guys from getting on the list. From an athleticism standpoint, I know that it's fair to kind of gauge these guys in the generation they played in. Lenny Wilkins, you could say the same thing for. He's been on the list prior to. Nate Archibald, guys like that. Elvin Hayes, a lot of players here. But all in all, leaning a little bit towards guys that I saw play. I mean, I do research. I look up who's who. Alex English was a phenomenal scorer. Adrian Dantley as well. Dikembe Mutombo I had a hard one with because Dikembe Mutombo was one of the greatest shot blockers in my lifetime. But I do feel all in all, overall, While he could take over a game on defense, I feel that his offensive game just wasn't on par to crack a top 50 list or a top 75 list for that matter. But this is my honorable mentions, guys that I do respect that did not make my list. So without further ado, I'm going to give you my top 23. This is the final segment of my all-time NBA list. Going to start it off at the point guard position. John Stockton. A lot can be said about this great player. I'm going to start with the negatives just because, you can mix and match guys all day long, and there's a reason why Stockton is 23 and say not 15 or even higher. All-time NBA assist leader. Having said that, I don't believe he would have ever achieved that if Earvin Magic Johnson didn't retire prematurely due to contraction of the HIV virus. No knock on John Stockton. He played longer. He and Karl Malone made one of the best duos of the 1980s and 90s for that matter. Unfortunately, we're never able to win that elusive championship ring. A lot of that can be attributed to just running into some great teams in the West and also running into Michael Jordan. John Stockton, not too many holes in his game. I would say he lacked athleticism, but he made up for it in basketball IQ. Great court vision, phenomenal clutch shooter. I wouldn't say he was a phenomenal shooter. I'd say he was a phenomenal clutch shooter. He and Karl Malone had the pick and roll down. And just overall a great player. It's kind of crazy to think that he and Malone never did win a ring. When you look at great duos, they are in the mix with any other great duo you can name. If there's any knock, what I just said is that unfortunately he never won a championship. At number 22, a current member of the Brooklyn Nets, originally Oklahoma City Thunder, and in between Golden State Warriors, I'm talking about Kevin Durant. One of the true generational talents in terms of scoring. Listed as a power forward, plays with the skill set of a swingman, small forward, basically has range from all over the court, can essentially make any shot. Was able to win championships with the Golden State Warriors, joining them after losing a very tough 7-game series as the best player of the Oklahoma City Thunder. At the time, leaving Russell Westbrook and James Harden. Harden he later played with. Westbrook's currently with the Lakers. Start with the negatives. I guess a knock on KD was that he did leave his original team, which I will state he lost to in a Game 7. A lot of people hold that loss on him. Didn't shoot the ball well in that Game 7. He's also been called out by many, as I guess you could say, to be possibly a little too sensitive, maybe allowing outside influences to really affect him more than other athletes. I'm a firm believer that when it comes to the sport, nothing's off limits. When it comes to family, when it comes to outside things, that is off limits. But I also do believe that certain players, certain entertainers welcome it with all the social media outlets. But Kevin Durant is a phenomenal player. I do believe that he has to add to his resume to climb this list and to be considered ultimately a top 10 great. But I will say this, over the course of the last 12 years, 10 years, 8 years, just, given the different players that have come in and out of the league, I only put him second to LeBron James. And the reason I put him second to LeBron James is because I think James just made a bigger impact in terms of winning and how he affected his teams. Again, a knock on Durant is that when he went over to Golden State, it really was Steph Curry's team. LeBron could kind of get some of that too because of the fact that it was Dwayne Wade's team when he came over, but LeBron kind of rectified that by winning in other locations, Cleveland and Los Angeles. And when LeBron was in Miami, he was undoubtedly the best player. I do believe that in Golden State, although Durant was the best scorer, I think the case could still be made that Curry was the best player. Similar skill set, similar attributes. I'm going Dirk Nowitzki at number 21. He didn't have the superstar path at the beginning of his career. This is a guy that really worked hard to perfect his craft. I think Dirk is a hell of a player. The height of his success culminated in winning an NBA Finals against the previously mentioned Miami Heat, the LeBron James, Dwayne Wade super team Heat. It was a huge upset at the time. It was the first season that Miami was together with, Bosh, LeBron, and Wade. Dirk had one of the silkiest jump shots in the history of the NBA, definitely in my lifetime. Dallas winning that championship was kind of feel good because Jason Kidd started his career there. He came back later in his career to help them win. That was Jay Kidd's lone championship as well. I do believe Dirk may have had more championships, but playing in the very ultra competitive Western Conference, I think held him to only winning one. But when you look at the numbers, you look at all his contributions. I mean, he's a top 5 power forward. And, the power forward is a little different from, say, what the position entailed in the 80s and 90s. It was more of a power position, more down low. Dirk could also play that game too, but Dirk had range. Dirk played outside. He had a great deal of athleticism too. And I wouldn't call him a great passer, but he had a way of making those around him better. And he did know when to take the shot versus when to get rid of it. I think Dirk is a phenomenal player. Into the top 20 now, Charles Barkley, former league MVP, 1993, helped the Phoenix Suns win the Western Conference that year. That is Barkley's only finals appearance, losing to the Chicago Bulls and the great Michael Jordan. Rewatched that series not too long ago on Hardwood Classics, and I must say that the Suns likely could have won that series if a couple of things go differently. They were on the cusp of forcing a Game 7 before John Paxson hit the walk-off 3, or I should say the 3 that led to the Horace Grant block on KJ, Kevin Johnson. Charles Barkley, one of his best attributes, one of his things that stand out about his game is that he was an undersized power forward. He played big, but for his position, he actually was shorter, undersized, did at times struggle with his weight. But just a willingness to do whatever it took to win, I think, is one of the things that made Charles Barkley so great. Many players over the course of time have been intimidated when playing against the likes of Michael Jordan. I don't believe that Charles Barkley was ever affected by that. He's an original dream teamer, started his career in Philadelphia, got to play briefly with the great Julius Erving. But when he moved over to Phoenix is when I believe that he truly became a top 2 to 3 player in the NBA during his peak. And now is in his second career, one of the voices of Turner Sports, in my opinion, which is the best panel of analysts in any sport. Ernie Johnson, Kenny the Jet Smith, Shaquille O'Neal, and Charles Barkley, the best unit, in my opinion, in anything covering sports. At number 19, we have Jerry West. Kind of learning a little bit more about Jerry West as I just started watching the new series about the 1980s Los Angeles Lakers, highlighting Magic Johnson as the main character. I'm going to start with Jerry West and his impact in basketball. He's the logo. Jerry West is the logo of the NBA. That in itself speaks volumes about the kind of player he was. He actually won an NBA Finals MVP while still losing the game. There was some satirical humor that was brought to that in the new Lakers series that I just started watching. I would suggest if you got HBO Max, definitely check it out. But West has an interesting story even on the ownership managerial side with making probably the greatest trade in NBA history, which brought Kobe Bryant over to the LA Lakers for Vlade Divac. I wouldn't say Kobe was an unknown, but he was definitely unpolished in that 96 draft. Mainly the talk was Allen Iverson. They traded an established center, Vlade Divac. And I believe that when that trade was made, West was already looking ahead, knowing that he had an opportunity to sign Shaquille O'Neal from Orlando. At the time, it didn't look like the greatest trade. It turned out to probably be the best trade in all of NBA history. And an interesting tidbit on Shaquille O'Neal is that during the lockout, he was actually able to talk to Shaquille O'Neal because it wouldn't be, I guess, necessarily viewed as tampering. I believe if the legend is true, they met at a golf tournament, but West kind of had a verbal from Shaq already before he won and made that Kobe Bryant deal. One of the best deals in NBA history, as I already said. And as a player, Jerry West, I would say probably, maybe with the exception of George Mikan, the combo he and Wilt, he's the first great guard in Lakers history. I think that's the best way to size him up. But phenomenal player and much deserving of this top 20. Isiah Thomas, this man was a rival of the Lakers, good friends with Earvin Magic Johnson. Going to start with the negative, and not necessarily a negative of Isiah Thomas, but a negative surrounding his name. I do kind of think it was a little criminal that Isiah Thomas was not on the original Dream Team. The way it was kind of explained in The Last Dance is that because of the fallout between he and Michael Jordan, the Pistons didn't shake hands after the Bulls finally beat them after 3 series. The Bulls finally broke away from the Pistons, beat them. Pistons left the floor. It was deemed unclassy by a lot of people. Isiah Thomas made mention that years before, the Celtics, who were the big kids on the block, kind of pulled the same thing on the Pistons. While I don't condone that kind of behavior when you take a loss, I think you got to acknowledge it, take the L, shake hands. I do understand why that was kind of the mindset. Different league at the time, too, not the same kind of kumbaya where everybody is buddy-buddy. As far as the player goes, Isiah Thomas played big, was not by any means the tallest guy at his position. But I think one of the great things about him, like you even compare him to a Magic Johnson, there's a big height differential. But Isiah was not afraid to go at anybody, whether it be Michael Jordan, Magic Johnson, Larry Bird at the time, who were the best players in the league at the time. Isiah's speed was a huge asset to him. Definitely a great shooter. Definitely the most talented player on a Bad Boys Pistons team whose theme was physicality, basically do anything pushing the envelope of what the rules are to make sure that you get what you need to get done in the paint. It was a different league back then. They fought a lot. But Isiah Thomas had a lot of heart, one of the toughest NBA players I've ever seen defensively, phenomenal. But I do think that he's one of those superstars that gets overlooked and forgotten because he's just not well liked in the same regard as some of the other players. And I would go as far as saying that with Michael Jordan being the poster child for the NBA, if you're not on the right side of Mike, you may very well get forgotten by the masses. But I don't forget Isiah Thomas. I think he was a phenomenal player. And one of the few guys I could say that in multiple playoff series got the best of Michael Jordan. Only Larry Bird could really say that besides Isiah Thomas. At number 17, I've got Dwayne Wade. In my opinion, and this is subjective, of course, as far as shooting guards go, after Michael Jordan and after Kobe Bryant, I believe that you could put Dwayne Wade anywhere between 3 and 6. I think he was that good. The heartbeat of the Miami Heat after Mourning, Alonzo Mourning, I would say, was really their first superstar. But Dwayne Wade won a championship before LeBron James arrived. And considering that they all came out together in college, he, Carmelo Anthony, and LeBron, that's a leg up that he will always have on his peers in that very famous draft. As far as the player goes, above the rim, excellent. Great handles. Great defensively. Not a lot of holes in Dwayne Wade's game. And I think one of the things from a character standpoint is that when LeBron James came over, Dwayne Wade was not worried about taking a lesser role in terms of offensively to make room for LeBron and to kind of share the limelight of whose team it was. But when you do things like that, similar to Steph Curry and Golden State, I think it speaks volumes about that it is your team. He did have a brief stint in his hometown of Chicago before coming back home to the Miami Heat at the tail end of his career. But yeah, as I already stated, I think Dwayne Wade is anywhere between 3 and 6 for all-time shooting guards. And a true champion, just a phenomenal player. At number 16, we have Karl Malone. Karl Malone is the number 2 all-time points leader. I could stop it right here and say that's enough. I had already mentioned his teammate, John Stockton. These two basically were the masters of the pick and roll game under head coach Jerry Sloan, the late, great Jerry Sloan. Malone, similar to Stockton, retired without an NBA championship. In the latter part of his career, he tried to join Kobe and Shaq's Lakers to win in 2004. They came up short in the 2004 finals to the Detroit Pistons, but back-to-back Western Conference champion, losing both times to the Chicago Bulls, and anyone who saw The Last Dance definitely check that out. But that is undeniably, in my opinion, the toughest challenge Jordan's Bulls ever had in terms of their championship runs. Utah Jazz are one of those great teams that just never won a ring, but no lack of effort by Malone or Stockton. Malone is a former league MVP. And in terms of power forwards, on some people's list, they may very well have him at 1. I have him all-time power forward. I would say no lower than 3. But one of the true greats, and when you lead a list of points over Michael Jordan even, now granted, Jordan retired a couple of times, I just think it speaks volumes on your greatness. Malone had a great perimeter game, great power game, just a great leader. Always clutch, never really took a day off, and much deserving to be on this list. At number 15, we have Dr. J, Julius Erving. One of the most special things about Dr. J's game is that I think he brought the dunking air element to the NBA prior to, say, Michael Jordan. His very iconic dunk in the slam dunk contest from the free throw line, later copied by Michael Jordan, later copied by Brent Barry. But Julius Erving is the originator in that form of entertainment for the NBA. Formerly of the New York Nets in the ABA and in the NBA, had some epic battles with Earvin Magic Johnson, with Larry Bird. Pretty much has done it all post-career. NBA on NBC, he was a big contributor and is just widely respected around anybody who has ever played the game. Julius Erving, in terms of small forwards, definitely in the top 5 all time. He kind of checks all the boxes as a true great. At number 14, we have Elgin Baylor. Now, to size up Elgin Baylor the best I could, I would essentially say that he was his generation's LeBron James, and in some regards, his generation's Magic Johnson. And the reason I bring up those two players is because they are guys that kind of touch the stat sheet in every way possible. Great passers. They can score when they need to score. They get everybody involved. But Elgin Baylor, in addition to having the ability to play multiple positions, he didn't have any holes in his game. Phenomenal rebounder, great assist man, and he could score when he had to, and he could score in bunches. And I think Elgin Baylor, got to make sure that this guy is never forgotten because, as I already stated, his generation's Magic / LeBron, just a phenomenal player. At number 13, we have the big fundamental Duncan. He helped lead the San Antonio Spurs to their first NBA title, helping David Robinson finally win one against my New York Knicks. Were it not for one of the rare mistakes that Greg Popovich made, I think Tim Duncan likely would have had 6 rings and been 6 for 6 like Michael Jordan. But in terms of what he did on the court, I guess a knock, and not a knock by me, but maybe by the masses, would be that his game wasn't all that exciting. But the truth of the matter is that his basketball IQ was second to none. And the thing about the Spurs is that they accentuated team first. They were not the flashiest team, but they were always the most prepared, best coached team. Duncan was undoubtedly their best player. And his inside game was magic, essentially. He did everything perfect in terms of his inside game. In my opinion, the greatest power forward in the history of the league. And I think what's fascinating about Tim Duncan's story is that he didn't even start playing basketball until later into his teens. I think it's pretty phenomenal that Wake Forest took that chance on him, and ultimately he became the player that he was at the NBA level. When you look at comparing great players, I always think it's important to compare them to the people they played against. And during his era, he ran directly into Shaquille O'Neal and Kobe Bryant. And when you size him up against those two and see that he has the same amount of rings as Kobe and has Shaq beat by one, Tim Duncan is phenomenal. And I would put him ahead of the previously mentioned Karl Malone for the all-time greatest power forward. At number 12, we have a current NBA player, Steph Curry, son of former NBA player Del Curry. Steph Curry, in my opinion, possibly the greatest shooter in all of NBA history. Sometimes I think that people feel uncomfortable giving him all the accolades because of the fact that today's NBA is not as physical as some of the stuff that other fans have grown up on. That's no fault of Steph Curry. I feel that when you're great, you really could play in any era. And in Steph Curry's case, 3-time world champion, and he also played on a team that had the greatest record in NBA regular season history. Unfortunately, that particular team did lose the finals. But in terms of his accomplishments, when it's all said and done, one of the greatest guards of all time, one of the greatest shooters of all time, if not the greatest shooter. His range is outstanding. I've never seen a player who comfortably could shoot from that far behind the three-point line and have the efficiency that he does. One of the interesting things about Steph is that a lot of people, when they grade him, they go back and forth at saying, well, is he a point guard? Is he a shooting guard? He's a facilitator, but he's a shooting guard first. I think that's the best way to size him up. But Steph Curry, when it's all said and done, may very well break into the top 5. And to think that the New York Knicks missed him by 1 pick, it just kind of says everything about what it is to be a Knicks fan. At number 11, we have Shaquille O'Neal, just missing my top 10. And I'll start with the negative and tell you why he just misses my top 10. I feel that after his championship run in Los Angeles, he got a little disinterested, out of shape, and just didn't care as much. You take that away, I think he probably could have been the greatest center of all time as well as the most dominant. On the positive side of things, during his 3-year championship run, their three-peat, he and Kobe Bryant under Phil Jackson. I would say in my lifetime, with the exception of Michael Jordan, at the height of his prime, Shaquille O'Neal was the most dominant player I've ever seen. With the exception of an inability to shoot free throws well. He was just such an imposing force that nobody could really stop him under the rim. He famously broke backboards when he was younger in Orlando. Controversially, left Orlando to go play with the Lakers. And it seems to be the right idea and the right move because ultimately he and Kobe formed what is, in my opinion, the best duo in NBA history. Had they not broken up, I believe they could have won just as many as Mike and Scottie, if not more. Same head coach, as I already alluded to, Phil Jackson. Shaq also was able to win a championship with the Miami Heat as a complimentary piece to Dwayne Wade's team. But like I said, if he wanted to play longer, if he cared more, I think he would have. But from Shaquille O'Neal to one of Shaquille O'Neal's true idols, we're now starting into the top 10. I'm talking about Bill Russell. This man owns more NBA rings than anyone else. He is an 11-time world champion and a member of a Celtics team that won 8 straight championships. Interesting stat about Bill Russell. is that in his day, finals MVPs and regular season MVPs did not count yet. And I imagine that would be even more stuff on the trophy case for Bill Russell. In a lot of people's estimations, the greatest defensive player that ever lived. He often ran into Wilt Chamberlain, had great battles, and more times than not got the best. His team got the best of Wilt Chamberlain. If there's a knock on Bill Russell's game, I'll honestly say the reason why he's not higher on my list is because of offense. I think to be like the best of the best, you have to have all facets of the game. And while I'm not saying Bill Russell was awful offensively, he's not in the same category as some of the other great centers. So that is why I have him at 10, which is still a phenomenal ranking. But the NBA's ultimate winner, a lot of people talk about Michael Jordan, and it's a recency thing, and I get it. People talk about Kobe. Bill Russell, the most winning center of all time. I'm not going to call him the greatest center. Definitely amongst them, but the greatest winning center of all time. At number 9, we have a man who, in my opinion, is the second greatest point guard of all time, walking triple-double, the big O, Oscar Robertson. I feel that his game has been copied over the years with other great players. And I would say that he has every aspect of what greatness was at the point guard position. Literally, the only player at that position that I have higher than him is Magic Johnson. At number 8, I have Hakeem Olajuwon. Olajuwon, all time, is my number 3 center, behind only 2 former Lakers who I'm going to hit on shortly. Hakeem Olajuwon, at the height of his career, in my opinion, the best footwork of any center that ever played in the NBA. He really schooled the young Shaquille O'Neal, sweeping the Orlando Magic in 95. Year before that, avenging a college loss, beating Patrick Ewing in the NBA Finals in 7 games. He went back-to-back. A finals that we got cheated out of that I wish would have happened was Olajuwon's Rockets and Jordan's Bulls. In 95, Jordan retired. You could kind of tell that he still had the sea legs, was not all the way back. Orlando beat them. Houston beat Orlando. In 94, Jordan wasn't in the league. But he had a winning record regular season-wise against Michael Jordan and the Bulls. Unfortunately, they only played twice a year, so it's a short sample size to really say what would have happened in a series. I would have loved to see it because I believe that the Houston teams had the same amount of role players and shooters and secondary support from a scoring standpoint that the Bulls had. So unfortunately, we never got to see those finals, but I think Houston would have had a very good chance to beat them. But it's always something cool to debate on. At number 7, we have Larry Bird. Larry Bird, to me, is the second best player, if not third best player. He's the top 3 player of the 1980s. Only 2 other players that I put in the same breath of the 80s were Magic Johnson and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, players who he was very familiar with frequent NBA Finals appearances. Larry Bird, in my opinion, is one half of what saved the NBA. He and Magic Johnson, to me, while Michael made it global, I think that Larry Bird and Magic Johnson captivated people and made people care about the product that the NBA was pushing. You had one guy that essentially was a country boy, and you had another guy that was from, a city and that ultimately made his career in Los Angeles with the Showtime Lakers. And there was really no in between during that era. You either rooted for one or the other. But Larry Bird, one of the biggest knacks to his game was his intensity. A lot of people don't know this about him, but he was one of the greatest trash talkers of all time. And I think one battle that Larry Bird never lost was the mental battle. Phenomenal 3-point shooter. And he played on a Celtics team which featured 4 other Hall of Famers. They were able to win 3 NBA titles in the 1980s. Always got the best of Jordan's Bulls. Once again, not something that anyone can really say outside of Larry Bird that never lost to Mike. Only time he lost to Mike was in an invitational tournament, which featured Olympians versus college kids. But as far as the NBA ranks goes, he never, ever lost to Mike. As a coach, he was damn good, but he didn't last that long as a coach. And as a player, I believe that he could have and should have played longer if he didn't have all his back ailments. He played in a lot of pain. And I also think that the premature retirement of Magic Johnson affected Larry Bird into retiring as well, because I believe that both of them really played the game for each other in the sense that they enjoyed having that great friendship off the court, great rivalry on it. At number 6, currently member of the Los Angeles Lakers, Mr. LeBron James. Some people might say, why don't you have him higher? He has a losing record in the NBA Finals. I'll start with the negative. I think that's the biggest knock on LeBron James, that he doesn't have a winning record in the NBA Finals. Some people will accuse him and blame him for being the first person to start the super team era that has become very prevalent in today's NBA. I have mixed feelings on it. I think he did the right thing by going back to the team that drafted him and helping them win their first championship. But I don't believe when you're that important and you're that big of a player in the league, leaving to win. I feel that you've got to win before you go anywhere. That's just an old school mentality that I feel. But LeBron James, one of the most accomplished passers in NBA history, he has a really impressive knack for improving every team he's ever been a member of. He's played for Cleveland twice. He's played for Miami, and now he plays for the Los Angeles Lakers. He's won a championship with all 3 organizations. He has 4 overall, 4-6 record in the NBA Finals, which is not terrible, but when you're comparing it to guys like Kobe, guys like Mike, what you do in the finals does get remembered and does matter. I think the biggest thing with LeBron, when he's long gone out of the league and retired, is his durability. He's approaching, if he sticks around, he might be the all-time points leader, taking that from Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Like him or not, LeBron belongs on this list. And I kind of went back and forth with him and Larry Bird, and I was trying to go in my brain and say who would win if they played each other. But while I still have mixed feelings on that, I gave him the nod over Larry Bird. At number 5, we have the late, great Kobe Bryant. I don't really know what more you could say about Kobe. When I was formerly a member of the Jordan Patrick Show, our first show sadly dove into the recent death at the time of Kobe. He died tragically in a helicopter accident, claiming the life of his daughter, Gianna, and friends that were on the plane. As a player, his story is phenomenal. He came into the league at 18 years old. I made mention earlier in this segment that he was traded straight up for Vlade Divac, and in my opinion, the greatest trade in NBA history. He was half of the greatest duo of all time with Shaquille O'Neal. What I loved about Kobe is that he was a true student of the game. He wanted to be like Mike in a level, but he wanted to be better than Mike. I would say that from a skills standpoint, if you covered their faces and you put a Bulls jersey on Kobe and a Lakers jersey on Mike, I don't necessarily think that you would be able to know who was who. Posthumously, he was inducted into the Pro Basketball Hall of Fame. Michael Jordan spoke at his funeral and spoke about the kind of competitor Kobe Bryant was. And I think that says it all. When the greatest player of all time is in tears and shook up about your departure from not only the world of basketball, but just the world in itself, I think it speaks volumes on the kind of person Kobe was off the court. He did so much for women's basketball. He was a driving force for so many young people and helped make the game global. As a player, a 5-time NBA champion, he just had the most relentless work ethic I've ever seen of anyone. And the world truly lost when we lost Kobe. It wasn't just about basketball. Rest in peace, Kobe Bryant, one of the absolute phenomenal talents that ever grace a basketball court. And although I might have a couple of Lakers ranked ahead of him, to me, he is the greatest Laker of all time. He started there and he finished there. At number 4, we have Wilt Chamberlain. This man scored 100 points in a basketball game. That, no matter what era, is phenomenal. He owns a multitude of records. If there's any knock, all I'm going to say is I believe that if Wilt would have played in another era, say like Shaquille O'Neal's era, I do believe that perhaps he may have been cut down to size a bit. Same could be said about Kareem Abdul-Jabbar from a physicality standpoint, but the numbers are the numbers. Wilt Chamberlain helped multiple teams win championships. Prior to Magic Johnson, prior to Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, for a brief time, he was the face of the Los Angeles Lakers. The only knock, as I said, I do gauge some of this on the competition and the challenges that he had in front of him. Bill Russell frequently got the best of him, but I just can't imagine when you think about NBA basketball and how important scoring is to not have Wilt in my top 5, and that's why he's here. At number 3, now I'm a New York Knicks fan, but one thing I will admit is that the guy at number 3 is actually my favorite basketball player. This is the person that made me care about basketball, Earvin Magic Johnson. As I already stated about Larry Bird, one half of a duo that helped save the NBA. He changed the game in a lot of aspects. Point guards are not that big. He could play basically any position on the court, and as a rookie, he filled in for an injured Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and played center in Game 7 and helped the Los Angeles Lakers win an NBA title, his first as a rookie. And he won NBA Finals MVP. The man lived in the NBA Finals. He had a 12-year career shortened because of the contraction of the HIV virus. 5 NBA titles, 9 titles appearances in 12 years. At the time of his retirement, he was the all-time assist leader. In his final season in the NBA, his Lakers lost to Michael Jordan's Bulls 4-1. I do think as fans, the NBA got cheated. NBA fans got cheated out of seeing those guys play more together. I think the league really needed that, but definitely a passing of the torch moment. One thing I always admired about Magic Johnson is I think he was just as graceful as a loser as he ever was a winner. I think the man was all class. And he did make a brief comeback in 1996 playing with Kobe Bryant. That was cool. Seeing he and Kobe play together was really cool. Now, granted, Kobe was coming off the bench behind Eddie Jones, behind Nick Van Exel, but it was really cool to see both those guys on the court. And at the time, nobody thought Kobe would be who he was. But Magic Johnson, the best player of the 80s. And I think that he had some left in the tank before having to retire prematurely. Original dream teamer. And one thing I admire about him, too, is that when Mike became the face of the league, I think Magic very much supported that, and I think it says a lot about his character. At number 2, we have Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. On some people's list, he might actually be considered the best basketball player ever. And I'll be honest, I don't have a problem with that. 6-time NBA champion with the Milwaukee Bucks, winning 1, winning 5 with the Lakers. I think the only reason why Magic's not 2 as opposed to 3 on this list is because he kind of gets a little hurt because of the fact that he shared the team with Kareem. And I think that's the reason why Kobe's 5 and maybe not 3 or 4 or whatever, because he also shared it with Shaquille O'Neal. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, one of the most ferocious big men in the history of the league. He had the famous skyhook. NBA all-time points leader. Basically, is there a hole in his game? I certainly don't think so. I don't see any holes in his game. I think the only reason why I have him at 2 as opposed to 1 is because I do think Michael Jordan changed the game and changed the power of positions in the game. And what I mean by that is that during the Jabbar era, during the Wilt era, centers ruled the game. And I think the one thing that puts Mike ahead of Kareem is that as a shooting guard, he took the game over and kind of transferred power to the game running through shooting guards. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar was phenomenal, a great winner. And there's really no wrong answer if somebody says that he is one. But my number one, which should probably come to nobody's surprise, Michael Air Jordan. As a Knicks fan, I used to hate him. This man tortured the Knicks for so many years. You look back at it now, and it's like it's a privilege to say that I saw this guy play. I've never seen a killer instinct more so than in Michael Jordan. The way he finished games, the way he would always look for motivation, to find motivation. If anyone made the fatal mistake of trying to talk shit to Mike. Everybody remembers Mike as playing above the rim, as being a phenomenal dunker, and as being a phenomenal scorer. He has the most scoring titles in NBA history. But I think something that gets forgotten about a little too frequently when we talk about Michael Jordan is how great of a defender he was. He has a multitude of all NBA first team defenses. I also think Mike had the ability to make all those around him better. In the beginning, he did struggle coming to a very aging team in the Chicago Bulls. Over time, they drafted Scottie Pippen, Horace Grant, gradually got better. But when I think about teams that you would consider super teams, and when I look at the roster that the Chicago Bulls had in the late 80s, into the prime years of their 90s, 2 3-peats, which in between was a Jordan retirement, that is, to me, why he is the greatest NBA player of all time. I feel that he was the greatest player of all time when the NBA was pushing its greatest product. And when you look at the greatest players, so many great players, so many peers of Michael Jordan who were unable to win an NBA title, and you can attribute that so much to the dominance that Jordan had. Quite frankly, whenever I watch Michael Jordan play, I just felt that he just always wanted it a little more. He was obsessed with winning. In a lot of ways, you could compare him to, say, like a Derek Jeter or a Tom Brady in terms of just the relentlessness to just not lose. And more times than not, Mike did it. A perfect 6-0 in the NBA Finals. The greatest player of all time. As a second act in Mike's career, after retiring a second time from the Chicago Bulls, what I really found interesting was into his latter 30s and early 40s, playing with the Washington Wizards and being able to average over 20 a game. Now, when you think about being out of the league for multiple years and coming back at age 40 with a completely different organization and with a team that didn't have half of what your previous situation had to offer, I think it says everything about Mike. He's kind of been ridiculed somewhat as an owner. He was a basketball player and the greatest one that ever lived. I hope you enjoyed my list, and I'd love to get some feedback, and you guys talk shit. Tell me that I'm wrong about this one and that one. But I really do hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you're having a good weekend. Take care, guys.